The slap was so loud that the music stopped. For one terrifying second, I honestly believed a firecracker had exploded inside the house. Then I saw my daughter's head jerk to the side, her earrings swinging wildly, her hand flying up to her cheek as if her body needed proof that the pain was real. And before I could even stand, his mother clapped. Not loudly, not excitedly, just once, sharp, satisfied. "Good," she said, smiling. "That's how you correct a woman. My name is Sarah. I am Hiba's mother." And that single clap did something to me that years of patience never could. It was their second wedding anniversary. The house was glowing with fairy lights, the kind that make everything look happy even when it isn't. Relatives crowded the living room, plates heavy with food, laughter floating in the air like smoke. Anyone walking in would think this was a perfect marriage. Only I knew how carefully my daughter had chosen her dress, long sleeves, high neckline, soft makeup. Only I noticed how she kept touching her dupatta, pulling it forward, as if trying to hide herself from the room. Only I heard the tightness in her voice when she laughed. Cameron stood beside her, tall, confident, proud. The kind of man people called successful. The kind of man who believed success gave him ownership. "Cut the cake," someone shouted. Hiba picked up the knife with slightly trembling hands. Cameras lifted, phones came out. Everyone wanted the moment. She smiled nervously. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "Marriage isn't easy, but..." "But what?" Cameron interrupted, his smile gone in an instant. The room fell silent. Hiba glanced at him, panic flickering across her face. "I just meant we're learning, growing." "Learning?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Learning to speak without thinking?" I felt my stomach tighten. She leaned closer to him, whispering, "Please, not now." That word, please, was familiar. Too familiar. Cameron's jaw clenched. He didn't whisper back. Instead, he raised his hand. The slap landed across her face with brutal precision. The knife slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the stunned silence. Someone gasped. Someone else looked away. And then Farzana, his mother, clapped. "Good," she said again. "A wife must know her limits, especially in front of elders." My ears rang. My vision blurred. Hiba stood frozen, her cheek already turning red, her eyes shiny but empty. She didn't cry. That was what terrified me most. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they didn't belong to me. "What did you just do?" I asked. Cameron finally looked at me. His eyes were calm, almost bored. "This is between husband and wife," he said. "Please don't interfere." Farzana tilted her head at me. "Sister, you've raised her too soft, too educated. This is the result, educated." I looked around the room. People stared at the floor, at their plates, at the walls. No one spoke. Not a single voice said my daughter's name. Hiba finally turned to me. Her lips trembled. "Mama!" "Please." That please shattered me more than the slap. She wasn't asking for help. She was asking me not to make it worse. I understood then how long this had been happening, how many times she had swallowed pain to keep peace, how many slaps like this had been hidden behind closed doors. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag her out of that house. I wanted to break something. Instead, I sat back down. Cameron smirked, satisfied. Farzana nodded approvingly. They thought they had won. Dinner continued awkwardly. Music resumed. Conversations restarted, forced and fake. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone changed the song. Hiba sat quietly beside her husband, her eyes lowered, her hand shaking slightly as she picked at her food. No one asked if she was okay. I watched her from across the room, every motherly instinct in me screaming. After a few minutes, I stood up again. "Bathroom," I said quietly. No one stopped me. I walked out of the living room, through the hallway, past framed wedding photos where my daughter smiled like a stranger. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The moment the door closed behind me, my hands started shaking. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I had raised my daughter to be strong, independent, kind, and I had handed her into this. My phone felt heavy in my hand. There are moments when anger demands noise, and there are moments when anger becomes sharp, silent, and dangerous. This was the second kind. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't touched in years, Imran. We had worked together long ago, before marriage, before life pulled us in different directions. He was meticulous, quiet, the kind of man who noticed things others missed. I pressed call. The line rang. "Once, twice, hello?" He answered. "It's Sarah," I said. There was a pause. "Sarah, is everything okay?" I looked back at the glowing house, at the laughter floating through the windows, at the place where my daughter was sitting with a burning cheek and a trained silence. "No," I said calmly. "It's not what happened. My son-in-law slapped my daughter in front of everyone," I said, and his mother applauded. Silence. Then, quietly, "Do you want help, or do you want justice?" I closed my eyes. "I want consequences," I replied. Another pause. "Is this about Kamran Siddiqui?" Imran asked slowly.
Yes.
"There have been concerns," he said. "Nothing proven yet." I straightened. "What kind of concerns?" "Financial irregularities, inflated invoices, money moving where it shouldn't." My heart began to pound. Not with fear but with clarity. "He keeps files at home," I said. "Important ones. If you can access them," Imran said carefully, "things could change." I ended the call and stood there for a long moment, listening to the distant sound of laughter. When I walked back inside, Cameron glanced at me briefly, uninterested. Farzana smiled thinly. Hiba looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. I met her gaze and gave her a small, steady nod. Nothing loud had happened. No scene, no shouting. But something had shifted, because while they were celebrating an anniversary, I had just started counting the first time my daughter stole the key from her husband's pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly I thought she would drop it. "Are we really doing this, Mama?" she whispered. I looked at the closed bedroom door where Cameron was snoring heavily after another late night of drinking and false confidence. "Yes," I said softly. "We are, because sometimes the only way to escape a cage is to find the lock." The house was quiet but not peaceful. It carried the kind of silence that feels like it's watching you. The hallway lights were dim. Farzana had already gone to her room, probably satisfied after another evening of taunts disguised as advice. "Don't upset your husband. A smart wife stays quiet. Men have tempers. Women have patience." Hiba had heard those lines so often they had started living inside her head, but tonight was different. Tonight, she was choosing something else. Cameron's trousers were carelessly thrown over the armchair. He never imagined anyone would dare to search his things. Power makes people lazy. Cruelty makes them careless. Hiba moved slowly, each step measured. She slid her fingers into the pocket and pulled out a small silver key. It looked ordinary. It wasn't. She handed it to me as if it were made of glass. Her eyes were wide. "If he finds out he won't," I said firmly. "Not tonight." We stepped out of the bedroom and walked toward his study. That room had always made me uneasy. Dark wooden furniture, locked cabinets, files stacked too neatly. A space that smelled of control. Hiba hesitated at the door. "I've never gone through his things," she murmured. "You're not going through his things," I replied quietly. "You're protecting yourself." That gave her just enough strength to push the door open. The drawer was on the right side of his desk. Locked, waiting. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. Hiba inserted the key. The soft click sounded louder than a gunshot. We both froze. Nothing moved, no footsteps, no voices. Slowly she pulled the drawer open. Inside were files thick, organized, labeled with company names and dates. There were stamped contracts, envelopes sealed with red tape, and a black USB drive placed carefully at the back. And beneath the files, a second ledger. I felt something cold slide down my spine. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Hiba shook her head. I opened the ledger and flipped through the pages. Numbers, large numbers. Payments recorded differently than they would appear on official documents. Dates altered. Vendor names that didn't match any legitimate company I had heard of. I had worked in finance long enough to recognize manipulation. This wasn't a mistake. This was design. "Take pictures," I whispered. Hiba grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled, but she started photographing every page carefully, every signature, every stamp, every discrepancy. The USB drive worried me. "What if it's important?" she asked. "It is," I said. "That's why it's hidden." We couldn't remove it without risking suspicion. So instead, I photographed it clearly and placed it exactly where it had been. As we worked, something shifted inside Hiba. At first, she had looked terrified. Now she looked focused, almost angry. And anger, when controlled, can be powerful. When we finished, she carefully closed the drawer and locked it. The key went back into Cameron's pocket exactly the way we found it. We returned to the bedroom. He was still asleep, still unaware. Hiba stood there staring at him. "He looks so calm," she whispered. "Monsters don't roar all the time," I replied quietly. "Sometimes they sleep peacefully." Wow. We left the room without another word. The next morning, I sent everything to Imran, every image, every document. Within an hour, he called me. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Does it matter?" There was silence. "No," he admitted, "it doesn't." "Is it enough?" Another pause. "It's more than enough," he said. "This isn't a minor fraud. This is systematic. If this matches what we suspect at the company level, he's in serious trouble." I felt no joy hearing that, only calm. That same evening, I visited again. Cameron greeted me with his usual smug expression. "Back again, Auntie?" I like checking on my daughter, I said pleasantly. Farzana scoffed. You don't trust our home? I looked directly at her. I trust what I see. Hiba avoided eye contact during dinner. She was afraid her face might reveal something. Cameron seemed normal, too normal. That's how guilt behaves when it believes it's invisible. 3 days later, the first crack appeared. Cameron received a call during breakfast. I watched carefully as he answered.
Yes?
He said confidently. His expression changed within seconds. What do you mean internal review? His voice sharpened. On whose authority? Farzana spoon froze midair. What happened? He stood up abruptly and walked toward the balcony to continue the call. I remained seated, sipping my tea slowly. Hiba's eyes met mine. There was fear, but beneath it hope. When he returned, his face was tight with irritation. Just routine nonsense, he muttered. Audit team acting important. Is something wrong? I asked casually. He looked at me for a second too long. No, he replied. Everything is under control. But his hands weren't steady. That night he didn't sleep peacefully. He tossed, turned, checked his phone repeatedly. The following week things escalated. His office temporarily restricted access to certain financial systems. He was asked to submit documentation. Original invoices, vendor contacts, approval chains, documents he had altered. At home, his temper grew shorter. He snapped at Hiba for small things. The salt in the food, the way the curtains were arranged, the fact that she didn't smile enough. Fear makes cruel men more cruel, but this time, something was different. Hiba didn't shrink. She didn't argue either. She simply observed, watched him unravel. One evening, he cornered her in the kitchen. Did you touch my study? He demanded suddenly. My heart skipped. Hiba's voice remained steady. No. He searched her face. He wanted to see guilt, but all he saw was exhaustion. After a long moment, he stepped back. Don't ever go in there, he warned. She nodded. But when he walked away, she exhaled slowly. He's scared, she whispered later that night.
Yes, I said.
And scared men make mistakes. 2 days later, the official notice arrived. A formal inquiry letter from the company. Allegations of financial misconduct. Requirement to appear before a disciplinary panel. Cameron read it 3 times. His confidence cracked visibly. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Someone's setting me up. Farzana panicked. Who would do this? His eyes scanned the room. For a brief second they landed on me. You've been asking too many questions lately, he said slowly. I met his gaze without blinking. I ask questions when I see smoke, I replied. Fire usually follows. He clenched his jaw. That night he drank more than usual. But instead of shouting, he sat quietly, staring at nothing, because for the first time the control was slipping. And control was his oxygen. A week later, the company froze his access entirely. His salary was put on hold pending investigation. Colleagues stopped answering his calls. The same people who praised him began distancing themselves. Reputation is fragile, especially when built on lies. At home, tension thickened. Farzana stopped criticizing Hiba as much. Now her worry had shifted. What if this becomes public? She whispered one night. I happened to be there when she said it. Truth has a way of becoming public, I replied calmly. Cameron shot me a sharp look. You seem very confident, he said. I believe in consequences, I answered. His eyes narrowed. But he said nothing, because deep down he knew. The investigation was no longer rumor. It was real, and it was closing in. One evening, after another stressful call with his lawyer, he lost control again. He turned to Hiba in the living room. This is your fault, he shouted. Ever since your mother started interfering, he stepped toward her aggressively. Instinctively, he raised his hand. But this time, Hiba didn't flinch. She looked directly at him, and something in her eyes made him hesitate. It wasn't fear anymore. It was knowledge. And knowledge is dangerous. Don't, she said quietly. One word, firm, clear. He froze, because for the first time since their marriage he wasn't sure he was untouchable, and that uncertainty, was the beginning of his fall. The morning they came for him, he was still shouting about respect. That's what I remember most. Not the knock on the door, not the uniforms, not even the look on his face when he realized it was over. It was the word respect, because men like Cameron confuse fear with respect. And that morning, fear had finally found him. It was just after 8 a.m. The house smelled of burnt toast and tension. Hiba was standing near the dining table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Cameron had been pacing since dawn, phone glued to his ear, arguing with someone from his office. You can't suspend me without proof, he barked. I built half those accounts. Built. Yes, he had built them, carefully, dishonestly. Farzana hovered behind him, whispering prayers under her breath as if faith could erase financial records. The doorbell rang. Once, firm. Cameron froze mid-sentence. We all looked toward the door. It rang again. This time louder. I'll get it, Hiba said quietly. No, Cameron snapped. Stay there. He walked toward the door, straightening his shirt as if posture could save him. I stood up slowly, my heart steady, not racing. I had imagined this moment many times over the past weeks. Imagined the sound of accountability arriving. When he opened the door, two men stood outside, one in a formal suit, the other in uniform. Mr. Cameron Siddiqui? The suited officer asked. Yes, Cameron replied, forcing calm. We're here regarding the ongoing investigation into financial misconduct and fraudulent transactions linked to your firm. Farzana gasped loudly behind me. There must be a mistake, Cameron said quickly. This is harassment. We have sufficient documentation, the officer replied. You are required to come with us for questioning. His eyes darted behind them, as if expecting someone else to step forward and say it was a joke. No one did. This is absurd, he insisted. I haven't done anything. The officer opened a file and read calmly, listing vendor discrepancies, altered approvals, unauthorized transfers. The same pages Hiba and I had photographed weeks ago. I watched Cameron's face change. First denial, then irritation, then something else. Fear. Real fear. Farzana rushed forward. My son is innocent. Someone is framing him. The officer looked unmoved. If he is innocent, the investigation will prove that. They stepped inside. And that was the moment the illusion shattered. Neighbors had started noticing by then. Curtains shifted across the street. Doors opened slightly. Whispers traveled faster than truth ever does. Cameron turned toward us suddenly. His eyes landed on me. You did this, he said quietly, not shouting, not accusing wildly, just stating what he had begun to understand. I didn't flinch. No, I replied. You did? Hiba stood beside me. Not behind, beside. The officers informed him he would need to surrender his phone and provide access to certain accounts. He protested, argued, tried to sound powerful again. But his voice had lost its edge. Power evaporates quickly when confronted with evidence. As they guided him toward the door, he turned back once more. This isn't over, he muttered. I held his gaze steadily. It is, I said. The door closed behind them. Silence filled the house. Not the heavy, suffocating silence we had lived with before. A different kind. A releasing one. Farzana sank onto the sofa, wailing dramatically. You've destroyed this family, she cried. Hiba looked at her calmly. No, she said softly. He did. I watched my daughter carefully in that moment. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She looked awake, as if something inside her had finally stretched after being cramped for too long. That afternoon, news spread quickly within their social circle. Calls came in, some pretending concern, others seeking gossip. Colleagues distanced themselves. Invitations disappeared. The same relatives who stayed silent during the slap now avoided eye contact entirely. Reputation, I learned, is a fragile currency, and Cameron had overdrawn. The investigation moved swiftly. Evidence from the company's servers matched the documents from his study. Transactions were traced. Shell vendors exposed. Digital signatures compared. There was no dramatic courtroom speech. No last-minute twist. Just facts. And facts are merciless. A week later, formal charges were filed. Fraud, embezzlement, financial manipulation. His assets were temporarily frozen pending further review. The luxury car he loved so much was repossessed. Farzana stopped wearing her diamond bangles. Hiba, meanwhile, began something quietly powerful. She applied for full-time work again. When she told me, I felt a lump in my throat. Are you sure? I asked gently. She nodded. I don't want to live dependent on someone ever again. That sentence alone made everything worth it. Cameron was released on conditional bail during the legal process, but he wasn't the same man who had once slapped her in a room full of witnesses. He walked slower, spoke softer, avoided eye contact. One evening, he tried to regain some control. He stood in the living room and said, "We need to talk about what happens next." Hiba faced him calmly. "There is no next," she replied. He blinked. "What?" "I'm filing for divorce." Farzana gasped again. It seemed to be her only response to reality. "You can't," Cameron snapped. "Think about society. Think about our name." Hiba held her ground. "You should have thought about that before raising your hand." The room went still. He looked at me then, as if expecting me to convince her otherwise. I said nothing, because this time she didn't need me to speak. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. The documented abuse, the public incident at the anniversary, the financial case against him, all of it painted a clear picture. In court, Hiba stood tall. When asked if she felt unsafe in the marriage, she answered clearly, yes. No trembling voice. No hesitation. Cameron avoided looking at her the entire time. When the judge finalized the separation, something subtle but profound shifted in the air. Hiba exhaled, a breath she had been holding for years. Outside the courthouse, she turned to me. "Mama," she said quietly, "why didn't I see it sooner?" I touched her cheek, the same cheek that had burned under his hand that night. "Because you were surviving," I said. "Not living." Tears filled her eyes. "Not from pain, from release." Weeks passed. The case against Kamran continued, and eventually the company publicly terminated him. Legal consequences followed. Settlements, fines, reputation destroyed. Farsana stopped attending social gatherings. No one clapped for her anymore. No one praised her son. And I often thought about that anniversary night, about the slap, about the applause, about the silence in the room. If I had shouted that night, nothing would have changed. If I had dragged Hiba out immediately, she might have returned out of fear or pressure. Instead, I waited, calculated, acted. Revenge was never my goal. Protection was. One evening, months later, Hiba sat beside me on the balcony of my home. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange and pink. "I used to think strength meant enduring," she said quietly. "And now?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Now I know strength means leaving." I looked at Hariali, looked at her. She was lighter, brighter, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. That slap had echoed through a crowded room. But the consequences? They echoed further. Because when a man raises his hand believing he is untouchable, sometimes he forgets that the woman he struck has a mother,